Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I move to amend the rule to self-execute an amendment to strike Section 107 from the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill. H.R. 2028, this is the rider that allows guns to be carried on land, and I would like to discuss the measure, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman is recognized for discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I lift first the administration's policy, and I certainly am not carrying any of their water here, but it does save time for me to point to it. The administration objects to 107, which prohibits the Corps from enforcing its ban on firearms at a water resources development project. If enacted, this provision would prevent the Secretary of the Army from using the discretion now provided in law to enforce or revise the current Corps policy based on considerations such as security of critical infrastructure, public and employee safety, and the manner in which the firearm is carried. Example, open versus concealed in a variety of our states where Corps Rangers may be employed. Presently, Corps Rangers are not authorized to carry firearms and do not have full federal law enforcement authority. Mr. Chairman, the first thing that came to my mind when I saw this, aside from the fact that it's an unnecessary rider in a particularly important bill, is that a number of members may choose not to vote for what I believe Mr. Simpson and Ms. Capta and their committees have put forward within the framework that exists, good measures that are in this particular measure. Let me be very clear. I own a gun. I had a BB gun when I was 7. I had a single-shot .22 rifle when I was 12. And I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe everybody should have a right to have and own a gun. I do not believe, and it is not a part of this consideration, but I do not believe that anyone other than law enforcement authorities or military personnel should have an assault weapon, and that, I might add, is a problem. Some years back, the Surgeon General of the United States, Mr. Satcher, made a comment that set off a furor in this country that there was an epidemic of gun violence in our country. I wish I remembered the date, but it certainly was as much as a decade ago when Mr. Satcher was Surgeon General. I have considered and have talked with people that work with me and constituents about the number of gun violence-related measures in this country having nothing to do with ongoing events, having to do with the police and minority communities. I don't use the 1 minute rule very much, and I rarely, if ever, do the after hours speaking. But something is drastically wrong in our culture that is allowing for so many people and so many accidental situations with reference to weapons. Now, just as I think of the various core projects that I know exist in the constituency that I'm privileged to serve, including Hoover Dam and countless projects, one of the largest ones in the world, the Everglades restoration. The Army Corps is involved in dredging along the coastline and involved in measures that allow for particular problems having to do with the potential for people coming in a way to harm the infrastructure that the Army Corps works on. There's no real reason for the Rangers who do not have police authority to be put in the position of having weapons and or others who come on land that Corps is involved in to come on and be able to utilize weapons. I appeal to the better sense of our nature and recognize, as I said at the outset, I'm not against anybody owning a gun. And I also might add, I'm very proud of the fact that I receive, I believe and hope I do, 0 every year that the NRA scores anything. So I have no fear of the National Rifle Association, who have proliferated various states, including my own, with unnecessary gun legislation that has nothing to do with the Second Amendment or whether or not people have a right to have a weapon. This is alarming. So I'm considering just opening up the congressional website and ask people around the country, just send me, please, so is how we can get some empirical data. The number of people, not their names, but who got shot yesterday in your area? Who killed his wife? Who committed suicide? Just in my own area, 2-year-old child shot in Riviera Beach, Florida, just day before yesterday and died night before last. Countless children around this country have accidents in the same constituency that I'm talking about, not among black people, but among white people. A child came across the gun, child's 2 years old, 3 years old, and shot his mother, and the first thing out of his mouth is, "You're gonna be all right, Mom." Something is drastically wrong, and it needs to be addressed, and we need to stop doing things like this. Thank you for the time, Mr. Chairman, and that is the amendment that I offer at this time.
Thank you very much. Further discussion. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate I think the heart of the gentleman from Florida, but as I was sitting here, I grew up as a son of a state trooper. All of my life, from the earliest remembrances I ever had, I can remember his service revolver and other guns sitting in his room. I understand the responsibility that he had in training me and my brother in the fact that we were not to touch that weapon, that we were not to be a part, that it was kept out of our reach, it was kept out of our way. And as we grew, we were trained in the proper use, I believe, much as you were. What concerns me in this discussion, and the gentleman can have his amendment and we'll vote accordingly in just a moment. But I think working groups or others that would work to continue the rights of Second Amendment, I have differences of opinion on groups that may think you're better, or you appreciate more your legislation than mine. But I think the groups, whether it be the NRA or others who support gun rights, I think the interesting thing to me is I never found a gun, and your statistics that you just said are disturbing, as they would be to anyone. But I have never watched a gun jump up and shoot someone by itself. I have never seen one just stand up on my father or my own closet and jump out and kill someone. I've never seen, for that matter, a knife jump up off the table and stab someone. I think what we have to do here is, again, take personal responsibility and ownership. And in this discussion, realize that there are differences of opinion, and verily so, and should be debated. But I think in this area, especially when we get to the understanding that in some way that gun violence, which is tragic and should be curtailed and trained in many ways, I would just limit to say that there's also a responsibility factor driving a car, owning a gun, taking medication, whatever. There is just that personal responsibility factor that goes in there. And not to your amendment per se, but just a simple fact to say that there is a level that we all need to be responsible. And I think gun ownership is nothing less than that or any more than that.
Would the gentleman yield?
I always will.
My father was not a state trooper. My father came home when I was 9 years old and had been in a gambling game and took a gun and pawned. He knew that I was basically a responsible child as it pertained to weapons. And I remember it as if it were yesterday. My mom was cooking, and he told me, say, look at that gun I have on the dresser. And I went, and before I knew it, I shot the gun. It just missed my uncle that was in another room. That gun didn't jump up, as you say, but I was a 9-year-old child. The 3-year-old that shot her mother the other day was not the person that we would want to address and say to her that guns don't shoot mamas, children do. And what I'm suggesting to my good friend is that there is a serious epidemic, and it doesn't have anything to do with whether or not we have the right. Of course we have the right to have a weapon. And of course we should have that personal responsibility with reference to training. But something has gone drastically awry. And whether it's lack of parenting like you and I had, you were probably told just like me that don't you ever point one of these things at somebody unless you intend to shoot them. You understand? And I knew we had boy fights and everything. I never thought about going home and getting a gun. Somebody would have killed me in my house had I done that. So all I'm saying is we don't need to cause further proliferation in the society. And this isn't going to be immense, but it's just the idea alone. Thank you, gentleman.
And I appreciate that. And I think just in that generalization, your last comment sort of summed up my opposition, probably this. It's not going to address what you talked about. I agree with that in your statement just now. And I just say, and I would encourage the committee to vote no on this amendment. No,
Mr. Chairman? Thank you very much.